This is Bam Electric Ghost doing a live on the air for the first time with Amber Larkins, creative artist, published brand photographer. And welcome to the Fan Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
We do want to mention, you can see up on the top there, it says listen on Newsly. We are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if those of you who are listening or watching, if you use coupon code GHOST, you can get 1 month free premium subscription. As I said, we're a featured podcast on that platform. We will be on there later tonight with the audio only version of this podcast. So you can check that out. We also want to let people know we're actually at episode 1015, tracking that on Apple Podcasts since 2016. And today we're going to be talking about the topic of why is it so important to share our own story. And we've also got your URL, which you can go to that directly, transformationthroughtraumaproject.com. That will be fully clickable when we're published. And maybe you can tell folks what happens if they actually click on that URL.
Yeah, so if you click on there, you're going to go to my website, which is this is our Transformation Through Trauma project, which maybe we'll get into a little bit more of exactly what that is. It's pretty big. It's a big project. I have a big vision for it. So yeah, I get to know a little bit more about the project and the things that we're doing to truly help people heal from trauma.
So, as I said, you're a creative artist, you're a published brand photographer, storytelling expert, serial entrepreneur, dynamic speaker, coach, forward thinking visionary. You got a lot of things you're into, and I can appreciate that because that's the way creative people are. They usually have a lot of hats out there. But what maybe you want to give people like your story, like your
Yeah.
background, to give that kind of understanding of where you're coming from.
Yeah, of course. So I laugh and I tell people I'm a visionary, which is why I have like 50 things behind my name. I've done a lot of things and I enjoy doing a lot of things. And I see things before they're fully complete, which I think all visionaries do. But I started out in fitness actually, and fitness was an area of my life where I saw major transformation, so many areas, so many different things just in the genre of fitness. When I got married and had kids, I kind of got out of the industry, but I always loved it. So I picked up a camera to shoot my son when he was born. This has been 12 years ago. And I'm like, I should photograph some fitness, some athletes, so I can kind of get that itch, satisfied. So I started photographing athletes, and after years of photographing different athletes, I would hear stories. This seemed like a trend. People would open up to me. They would share with me how fitness had changed their life in many different ways. People that had overcome horrifying accidents or, debilitating diseases. And I'm like, I feel like these stories it's not fair that I'm the only one hearing these. So I started praying about a way that I could use my talent as a photographer to get these stories heard on a bigger scale, on a bigger platform. And that is kind of how Transformation Through Trauma was born. I started photographing trauma stories and then triumph, so the overcoming, and photographing those stories. So in that, we're telling the story of adversity and then triumph. And it was really it's a beautiful thing. And it started as a passion project. And then probably about a year and a half ago, I just kind of ran with it and thought, this is something that I'm passionate about. It's something I love, and it helps other people. And so we've now got a podcast that goes with it. And I interview experts and talk to different people specifically about trauma. But what I do is, through the Transformation Through Trauma project, is help people heal through art.
Yeah, art therapy. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I'm a music producer and podcaster. I initially started this podcast with the goal of talking to emerging and independent artists I didn't think were being listened to, primarily female singer-songwriters and artists. That's where we started, and we still have most of the people we talk to are still like female-centered creators or creatives, because we
Yeah.
still feel that that audience or those people that those guests are not always the ones that you see, and the influencers tend to be in a different type of mindset. But yeah, I just thought it was important to share those stories in the same way that I think you are. Your photography, how are you presenting that? Are you in galleries or online galleries or through the podcast? Do you do visual displays of your work?
So I haven't really done. So our podcast is still pretty new. We've been around almost a year now. I'm still getting the hang of podcasting, to be honest with you. Um, the podcast actually started as something that where I just wanted people to have an authentic place to share. But
Talking, yeah.
after doing it for like, the first 6 months or whatever, I realized what was really helping people, though I do sprinkle stories in there, but the stories that was really, I was seeing the needle move was where we were interviewing experts that had become experts in whatever type of trauma they were helping because they had their own story.
Hmm.
So we operate on the
Oh yeah.
podcast. We operate on four pillars, which is your trauma story, your transformational journey, your triumph story, and then your takeaways. So what you would recommend someone else do in the face of that particular trauma. The photography has been something that it's although I saw it merging things. Sometimes things don't always go as planned, um,
Hmm.
but we've shot people that are a lot of the people we have shot has come on the podcast to share their story,
Oh,
but
cool.
we've these pictures have been in magazines. Like we've photographed people that have got featured on front covers. We've photographed different stories for like origin stories for businesses,
Hmm.
um, you know and for experts that have a big why as to why they're doing what they're doing. So it kind of shares their story, and it's usable content for them, and it's compelling because it grabs attention.
Yeah, the podcast format is really interesting because I started it because people say, "Well, how is interviewing creatives help you with your brand?" Because I initially did it just because I like to do it. I kind of fell into it. Some guy interviewed me from New York, and he was talking about my music,
Hmm.
and then we started talking about music in general. And in the first after the first podcast, we did a dual podcast that we co-hosted, and we just talked about music. And then I started, he couldn't do it anymore. And I said, why don't I just find all these artists that I think need to get pushed? Bands and artists from multiple genres that nobody's talking about, kind of in the underground, and
Right.
just give them that push. And then from there, I said, well, it doesn't have to just be musicians. It could be poets, photographers, filmmakers, actors, and then it branched out to people who are life coaches, mentors, CEOs, anybody who's creative, because even a business person could be creative, and then tell their story. And so that's how it became very expansive. I kind of was in a narrow zone, and then I got very expansive, and now I kind of bounce around. Sometimes I'll have a musician on. Now most of the people who are on the show are not musicians. Like 90% of them are not non-musicians, but they're creative. And
Yeah.
so it just finds you find it like where it goes from 2016 to 2023, it just changes. And I kind of went with the flow.
Yeah, that's kind of what you have to do, I feel like. And it's funny because art, it's a beautiful thing. And I heard, I'm trying to remember who I heard say this, but I saw it and I thought it was so compelling because they said that art, no one thinks of the importance of art until you need it. So like if someone passes away, or if you're struggling in some way, shape, or form, like then you find art therapy, you find music, that's when you need the music, or that's when you need poems, or that's when you need to look at art. So people, I sometimes I think people will disregard art as important, but it's so important and vital to human nature and our
Yeah.
creativity in general.
Yeah. It's like a pillar. Like people don't realize how much of a pillar it is. Because like being a musician's like I do music whether it's gonna make money or not. The reason I do music is I like to play the keys. So I'm
Right.
gonna play a piano whether it's gonna hit or not. I just like playing it. And so I'll put it down. And it's like, to me, it's catharsis. Because I think
Yeah.
what happens with an artist, what I tend to think about like the Victorian poets, there's a muse, and I can channel the muse. And I'm
Mhm.
taking what's inside and what's outside, what's in a microcosm, what's in a macrocosm, and creative people, being a jazz type of musician, experimental musician, I can just play off the cuff in a flow state. I can just, and I don't have to know what the next note's going to be. I'm not trying to be
Right.
perfect. I'm trying
Right.
to just live in the moment and use that to express myself however I feel.
Mhm.
And some people have a hard time with that because some people they want to know what the next note is. They want it to be perfect, and that kind of translates to life. Like you get these people that they have to have everything all lined up, and you have other people are willing to go with like take number three instead of take 99. Like maybe
Yeah.
they don't have to keep on revising. Like why I do the podcast live because I can interview more people if I
Mhm.
don't go and edit every episode. And if I let it be what it is, it's authentic and it's real, whether it has a bunch of ums or whatever or glitches, it's what it is. And
Yeah.
it's that moment, kind of like a painting, or if you play a song, it's like that moment in time. I might not be able to recapture that. And that's what
Mhm.
makes it good. Is that
Yeah.
that's kind of cool.
I agree with you. I think it's awesome. And there's a place I think for authenticity and there's a place for more polished things, but I think there's a beauty in authenticity and just being it is what it is kind of a thing. So I love it.
Yeah, it's a hard thing because like everybody, I run into kids today when I'm working with a kid, a producer, like as a producer, and they're just trying to make everything so perfect. And I kind of go back and say, why don't you listen to like Exile on Main Street and tell me if that's perfect? Because it's not. Like you can't put the metronome to it. You can't track Keith Richards on a BPM. You can't because that's not what it is. He's like he feels it. He plays it the way he feels. Right? And so that's what it is. And then people are like, well, they're trying to get some formula to trigger some algorithm to get all these views. It's like, just because you got a million views doesn't mean it's good. It
Right.
just means you got a million views.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I do something very similar, even though when I do photo shoots, for example, they're very polished for the most part. We have now in my branding company, we have content creation, which is, some of that is a little bit not so, it's not scripted, but it's not so polished and perfect. But with the transformation through trauma project, they're very retouched. They are art.
Mhm.
But in saying that, that's the finished version. But we also, I tell people it's intuitive for me. I listen to your story. We go into depth about your story. You share your story with me, and then it's very intuitive. And in fact, I'll share with you one of the girls that I photographed. She was one of the more early on ones that I photographed, and she had come from the army and had been in Afghanistan, and her whole platoon got um, bombed, and she had a lot of her comrades died that day, and she had her arm almost blown off. It was barely hanging on, and she says her story is amazing. She said when the EMTs got there, they told her just hold your arm and don't look down. And she said she didn't even know she because of the I guess the adrenaline or whatever.
Yeah, the shock. Yeah.
So she was trying to help her best friend, and he passed away that day. And later she finds out that when she woke up, she's in the hospital. She tells me her story, and I'm not doing it anywhere justice, like from what it really is. You need to go hear her story. But she's on if you go to the website, she's on there. But it was very intuitive. We took and we painted her arm red just to kind of represent the bloodshed that day, to represent the pain and the you know the death that came with it with her story. She's the one of the ones that went on to get featured on. She got I think 3 front cover magazines. She
Wow.
was featured on with those photos, and she's a speaker. She had met with President Obama. He was the president then, and just an
Mhm.
amazing story. And I tell people, like, it's just intuitive. Like, we
Yeah,
just,
it's that artist vision, and, like, if you're an artist, sometimes something just happens. Like, like, I could be with a trio or a quartet of guys, and we could have an idea, but once we roll the tape, we could have planned something, but something just comes out, and we're like, "Wow, that's actually perfect the way it is." And
yeah,
sometimes it doesn't do that, but sometimes, like, if you trust yourself, you've been playing, like, a long time, that artistic sensibility is there, right? And either
yeah,
you trust in it or you don't. And sometimes it's like if you have that muse and you trust it and you trust that you can do it. It's not like getting away with anything. It's like sometimes something just happens. It happens because you have been prepared for that moment, and you're in that moment and you know what to do with it.
well,
And it just happens.
it's kind of, it's just, that's just the artist characteristic, I feel like, because, it's like if you're doing a painting and you drop a piece of paint, like, you just work that piece of paint in. You can't remove that that
Yeah,
piece of
yeah.
paint, you
It's a
know,
layer. Yeah.
which is funny because the story that I just told you, we had a vision when we did the inspiration for the shoot. She was black girl, but we had inspiration. This lady was painted completely white. She was like really pale painted white, and she had on
Mhm.
a red glove, and that was the inspiration for the shoot. Well, I couldn't find a red glove. I looked
Oh,
everywhere
you
and could
gotta
not find a red glove. So I'm improvising, and we ended up using paint instead, which the photo shoot turned out amazing.
yeah, that probably just your gut feeling, and just that's the kind of, like, I was, talking to if you talk to some musicians, there's a story like with Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock. And Herbie Hancock was in a live setting and he hit a chord that wasn't expected. And he thought Miles was going to kill him. And Miles just actually took it and changed the song to match the chord he played. And then Herbie said, "Well, you know what? That taught me something about not agonizing about the next note or trying to make it perfect. Live in the moment." And Miles said that that's the whole point of fusion. Is
Yeah.
every day we're here, we evolve the song. Like
Yeah.
every venue we go into, we evolve the song. The song changes. It's supposed to change. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to play it the same way. You're supposed to feel that room, feel that crowd, feel the people on the stage, and make it whatever it feels that day. And
Hmm.
I think that's what artists, can do. I've talked to painters, photographers, theater people. It is that kind of riffing that it's not like I think it's still a talent to be able to do that. It's not like just, oh, well, you're just making it up. It's like there's something there that's really vital to the form.
Well, and you said something that is, I think, so important too, is that sometimes those mistakes, the things that we do that is unintentional, turn out to be even better than what the original was. So it's amazing as an
Yeah.
artist, you have that ability.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to people, authors, right? They world build, right? So they'll character build and they'll world build, and they'll actually sketch all that out. And then they'll have a
Yeah.
plan. And then they go into that flow state. And suddenly in the flow state, they come up with an idea that, like, wow, I got this plan, but my flow state kind of dream state came up with something that wasn't in the plan. It's actually better than the plan.
Hmm.
And it's kind of the courage to take that and not and be willing to actually change your plan.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some people make the mistake. Well, I can't change it because it has to be in this lane, and then they don't take advantage of the things that come to them.
Well, you see this too with actors. You'll watch a movie, and to us, watching the movie, you think, well, it's just that was all scripted. But then you hear of these particular actors that will kind of go off script and just say something, and it ends up being funnier than the actual script. So
Yeah,
you have to leave leeway for
yeah,
that.
that's room.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to have space too, because
Yep.
sometimes when music, sometimes it's like a painting. People don't realize we call it sound painting because we can layer. We layer sounds on top of sounds on top of sounds, and sometimes what we learn is like you might layer like 64 tracks, and there's so much going on that you go back and say, you know what, when it was down to like 5 or 6, there was more space and it actually sounds better than all the stuff I layered. And even though you did all that work layering, you start pulling it back and you say, you know what, it's actually better to leave the space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of counterintuitive because like you did all this work and you might have spent tons of time, but it's like sometimes the more raw, less perfect, more willing to hear. Like once you layer, sometimes you can't hear things, but when
Mm-hmm.
you do less layering, things are more acute, and then you actually can really see it or hear it. And
Mm-hmm.
then that kind of is vulnerable. The vulnerability is there. Some I know some artists that like to pack it to kind of hide the fact that something wasn't perfect. They
Yeah.
hide the fact they had a missed note or missed like micro timing issue, and they if you layer it, then you can't hear it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, take some of that away and let it be what it
Yeah.
is.
Photography is very much the same. In, even when you're saying layering, I think of Photoshop. Photoshop is a bunch of layers of things that we've done to the photo to make it. And again, there's places for more edited work, and then there's places for more just like, just kind of raw out straight out of the camera shots. But with editing, it's like that too. Sometimes you start stripping stuff away, and you're like, oh, this actually looks better. Take away everything I just did.
Yeah, can you put filters? Like we have filters. I know you have filters.
Yeah.
I have filters. I could go through like hundreds of filters, and I could have wrote something, and it is what I played. But when I run it through the filter, it dynamically changes it. And if I throw effect processing, it changes it again. And so
Hmm.
I'll have, 12 different versions of what I originally did.
Right.
And then I was like, well, I went too far, right? Because without the filter processing, without the layers, without the reverbs and the delays, it sounds like X, like this. And then with that, it sounds like that. And then they're like, well, I kind of ruined it. And it's kind of like that unplugged. Like if
Yeah.
you see Kurt Cobain come on MTV and he does unplugged Nirvana versus that fully plugged in Nirvana. And he's like,
Yeah.
wow, that guy has like a lot of talent and he has like a lot of emotion, a lot of real raw feeling. And when he was
Hmm.
screaming, yeah, I understand the screaming. It was at that punk aesthetic, but when he actually sang the songs, it's like, wow, there's something delicate about that. It's something really good. And sometimes you want to kind of dial it back.
Hmm. Yeah. One thing you just brought to my attention that I've never really thought of is that how all art kind of follows the same format and of our perception of it, kind of what we see when we see art and what we can do with it as a person, and or lack thereof, what we choose not to do with it. So it's funny because I've never thought of how much photography correlates with music until I've spoke to you.
Yeah, because I'm an engineer producer, so I got all these tools. And I've got analog old stuff like 70s stuff, and then I got the modern stuff. And there's like a big school of thought that like the analog stuff from the 70s and the 60s is better. And what I tell people is what serves the song. If I want something to have that analog 70s, 60s feel, yeah, it works. But if I want something to have like really dynamic bells and really interesting pianos. There's some digital tech that I actually can get a German grand piano that I can't get through my analog.
Mm,
So it was like sometimes I might want to use that, or I might want to do strings that I couldn't afford to play or go hire somebody to do, but I can use some modern tech that can give me Stradivarius level strings. And I want that. So I'm going to use it. So it's kind of like it's whatever serves to whatever you're working on. It's probably like why you use a different camera lens,
mhm.
why I use a Moog versus a Roland versus a Yamaha versus this versus that. Why
Yeah.
would I do a different thing? I do it because that's what serves the song.
Yeah. Yeah. There's many layers to it.
It's just interesting that I think the cathartic nature. What I've talked to a lot of singer songwriters is they use music as their therapy. Right, a
Hmm.
lot of times, like the art therapy or like a singer songwriter, the reason they're in it is because it's kind of like going to the therapist. Every time they write a song, it works through that pain, that gets worked out in that project. And then
Hmm.
they're able to kind of get it out and it's outside of themselves, and now it's this piece of art. And
Yeah.
one like that to me has been very cathartic. I'm a cancer survivor. I'm a level 3 sarcoma when I was 27, and I kind of
Wow.
use music to kind of go through, my journey, to kind of, and once I got out of cancer, I became more confident about presenting myself and not worrying what people thought. Because I
Mhm.
figure if I can survive that, then I can just swallow it down. I'm not going to worry about putting my stuff out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I actually, my podcast, I release episode every Friday, and the episode that released today was actually an expert on cancer. She's talking about cancer preventative things, and so it's funny it comes full circle. But that's awesome that you're now cancer free, correct?
Yeah, I'm 56 years old. I got cancer when I was 27. I survived it, and it really changed my life. It changed my mindset. I lived in Japan. I started, reading poetry, and the version of myself before the cancer, I would not go in front of anybody. I wouldn't be doing this show at all. The version I was before that, because I was scared of things. I was scared of public speaking. I was scared of travel. I was scared of going outside of my little
Mm,
zone. And then after I went through it, I said, well, you know what? If I can survive that, you still have fears in life, but I was able to get past some things that were holding me back. And I think
yeah.
it's, art therapy is really important, but also just kind of getting that self-limiting beliefs and like, why can't you do it? And once you realize you can do it, things just open up.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking maybe you need to come on my podcast. You have quite a transformation story.
I like to come on other people's shows. It's just like to tell a story. I just like to be it's just an example. A lot of people I've talked to that are the creative people I'm dealing with, most of them have come through some kind of trauma. Like
Mhm,
it's interesting. Almost every story I've had on the show, when you get down to most of the creative people, they usually had some kind of pivotal moment, some crucial moment that they got past themselves. They got
mhm,
out of their own way. And then they decide, well, yeah, I can make my own business. I can be that writer. I can be the poet. I can be the painter. I can be the film director. And they just, it's not overnight sensation. They started doing the steps, but they started believing that they could do it.
mhm. Yeah, and there's something so powerful about mindset when it comes to any of those things, and I think art does play a pivotal role in transforming our mindset because it's almost meditative. So it's like as we're doing art, as I'm doing photography, and I've read about other people that have used photography, being on the other side, being on the side that I'm on, which is taking the photos, as that to be very, healing in nature. So I think that when you start creating, you become a creator. I personally believe we're all here to be creators.
Yeah.
We- We're made to create. I mean, I believe in God. I think we're made in God's image. And therefore, if He's a creator and we're made in His image, we are creators by nature. So, what is it that we're put here to create? That's finding our purpose and figuring that out. But if you're not in your creative genius or your creative zone, or you don't know what that is, then finding that can offer lots of healing in itself, I believe.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest, what I found, I got into creativity when I was like 16, got into music, and I never stopped. And the interesting thing is there are people around me, and it's like they were other musicians, but they all stopped. And I kept on going, and it's like it wasn't because I was like, I want to be in the top 10. It was because, like I said, I like playing the keys. Playing the keys to me is like therapy.
Hmm.
Like if I go and I play what's inside, I just play, and it makes me happy. And then if I put it on the wall, put it out there in the world, it makes other people happy. And I think some people don't give themselves the permission because they say, well,
Hmm.
doing art, that's like childish, or like I can't, that's arrogant to think that I could do something as good as the people I see in the museum, or I can't sing as well as what the people I hear on the radio, so I shouldn't do it. And I think that's like the first mistake is like everybody's voice is so authentic. I mean,
Hmm.
you would have never got Dylan. if he was worried about his voice, because his voice
Mhm.
was not the norm in the industry. In fact, when he was doing it, people, it was very hard. It was a very hard climb for him to do. It took like 10 years for him to get where he was at Columbia. He went through the whole process, but his writing is really what pushed it over. And in a world that was looking for like a Frank Sinatra, Johnny Mathis, it was like the age of the vocalist for him to come in when he came in and have the voice he had. It was his this songwriting a capability. People said, well, there's something about the way he writes this stuff. And then when he found his voice, it was unique. And then there was a willingness to actually accept that unique voice. And I think that's what it kind of story is like. Not that you can be Dylan, but look at Dylan at the beginning. People didn't think that that was it.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the beauty of art too, is that we look at other people's art and we can be inspired by it. And I think that inspiration is beautiful in and of itself. So therefore we can be inspired by creating it, or we can be inspired by seeing other people's, and it can inspire us to create more. And I think it's really it's just a beautiful thing, and art is one of those things that's just vital to our nature. I feel like for us to do. And if you can find something where you can make a living doing the thing you love, that's when you've tapped in to your zone of genius in a real way. But yeah, and I one other thing I would like to bring up about that point you just made is that people um they have this idea, like, this is a self-limiting belief, I believe, where people will think that they have to be like everybody else. It's human nature that we kind of feel that pressure, I think, and I struggled with this a lot in my earlier years as well. But there is something beautiful in being unique. And if you look at the people who have really moved the needle in the world, made a big stand, it's the people that are not scared to stand out and be their individual self and be different. And there's something really beautiful in that. And I just, I feel like I always want people to embrace that and not be scared, because you're different could be the next big thing. You never know.
Yeah, that's the thing because the people forget is like, my heroes like guys like Lou Reed, Hendrix, Dylan. They were willing to kind of push the needle at the bleeding edge of where they were. Hendrix was told when he was in the studio that feedback wasn't going on record, and he forced it. He said he went on the boards and did some of the engineering himself. He said these things have to sound the way I hear it, and the world was like, you can't do that. The stuff that he was doing was, even today there are people that can't even match where he was, because there's still all these kind of people in the canon that say, well, it should be done this way. And what happens is like the people who push the canon are the people on the bleeding edge of the canon say, well, why don't we just reinvert and kind of rip up the canon or turn it inside out? Like, why not? And there's so many people in art schools, they get taught, well, what I've heard a lot of professors say, well, you take the things I taught you and then break all the rules. Don't get wedded to the rules, because,
Mhm.
the people who push it are the ones who aren't wedded to the rules.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I see this as well in marketing and in business. So, um, the whole thing of if you're an entrepreneur, you open up Facebook or any social media app, and you're going to scroll through and see all these ads, and it's like everybody's got the same kind of ad. You're hearing the same thing. It's different face, but same person, same ad, and it's like, what is actually going to move the needle is the people that stands out, that they disrupt the status quo. That's the people that's going to capture your attention. When you see something that's
Yeah.
outlandish, that's when you're like, oh, let me
Yeah,
check
it's
this
always
out.
that they always get confused when somebody out of TikTok breaks through the gate and gets to be like a top 10 music person because they didn't go through the gatekeeper. And that's the way it's been going on in the music industry. It's people in the underground, in mixtapes, on SoundClouds, and all these like other kind of underground venues where I kind of live with my interviews, is I deal with a lot of those people and stuff bubbles up. And then sometimes it just blows up on YouTube or blows up on some social media, but it's not controlled by the structure. like the big business structure tries to replicate what's in the top 20. All they
Uh,
want to do is keep on taking Beyonce or Taylor Swift and make another version of the same thing. That's what they like to do. That's what they've been doing. It's the people who come from the outside. Then eventually they get in, but and then they become the standard bearer. But people seem to forget that all the time.
mhm.
It's like, don't you remember? Hendrix was not part of the structure. He was outside of it. Became part of it, but he was outside of it.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. It's so the big takeaway is be authentic.
Yeah, and
Embrace
so
your
people are.
authenticity.
It's that vulnerability, I think, because it was like when you see the kids today, it's like, well, I want to get 1,000 views. I want to get 10,000 views. I will get well, if you do a cat video, you're probably going to get in the algorithm. If you take that cat video and use the same song that a million other people are using for the same type of thing, then you're going to push the algorithm. But what is that worth? The fact that you've got the same song everybody else is hearing, the same 30 seconds, the same kind of cat video being applied to how many other things? It's like, well, that's this repetitive kind of algorithm. Like, yeah, is that really what you were about? Is already like, how did we ever get Motown or Stax or
Right,
Blue Note with people doing that? I don't think it did.
right. We are definitely seeing a shift with the social media. I feel like it's making people celebrities that wouldn't have otherwise had a chance. But it's like letting the people decide what they want to see, letting the
Yeah.
people decide what they want to hear. So it's really interesting to watch this.
Yeah, I mean, you do have places where, like I said, the underground bubbles up, and you get new things. Is this the popularity kind of thing? Is just stuck on the algorithm until something new breaks it? Um, and if people make, like you said, the same ad, the same type of thing, somebody offering the same kind of service, and it's always sounds like too good to be true. Like you're gonna make $1 million if you use my thing. It's like, okay, yeah, right. uh, but it seems like the vulnerability of actually putting something out unique. I think
Mhm.
that's the hard thing because a lot of people are like, well, if I see, you know, what what the standard is, what's in the canon, like that's what I should do. And what I always ask people when they come to work with me is like they want to show me that they can do something that's kind of popular, and I tell them I want to hear the song that you're scared to show anybody because the song you're scared to show anybody is probably closer to something that is really you. And it's what I'm more interested in because you are your best asset. And
Yep.
if you come to me with your most fragile, vulnerable demo, and we make it sound the best it can, but not try to make it sound like somebody else, make it sound like the best version of you, that to me will be the thing that really pushes it because you are not like anybody else, and that's what we could push.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. You never know if those things that they're scared to show you is gold. Those things could be gold. And I do think that there is a level of it's hard for people to step out on that and I I don't know. I think that we look at our I struggled with this a lot. I don't know that something doesn't shift as you get a little bit older. And you're like, okay, I just don't care anymore. I'm just going to start putting stuff out there. But I think it's human nature. We all struggle with it on some level.
Yeah, because you want to be in the group. I mean, being in the group, because what happens is what you get haters, and I see what happens. Like you put something out there, people will spend time to put tearing it apart to have it. They're not even in the zone. They don't, you know, they don't sing, they don't play piano, they don't do, photography, they don't do art, but they're a critic of art. And so like as soon as you put it out there, they want to go slam it. And it is all
Mhm.
kinds of examples of people who like got slammed and then suddenly later they're like, oh, this is in the canon. Like, to me, like a band like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. People when they first showed up, they say we're like the worst band in the world. Then later, Rolling Stone reinvents it and says, "Oh, they're a 5-star band, one of the best bands ever." Well, that's not what they said when they came out.
Right. Right.
So it's like like, sometimes you get revisionist history based on the fact that suddenly all these producers in the '80s started saying that Lou Reed and the Velvets were the reason why they got into music. And so you have all these major bands in the 80s and 90s were like name checking him all the time, saying like that's the reason why I did it. And then suddenly they kind of rewrite their uh their intention. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not so familiar with music. But as you're talking, I am thinking about, some of the artists like the I don't remember the guy's name. Don't kill me here. But recently he come out on social media and was playing the guitar and went viral. And
Yeah.
it was about the government, or I don't
Oh
remember.
yeah, I heard about that. He was a country
Yeah.
guy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. He went viral. And then you have artists like, I think Dax. Do you know who that is? Like, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
he started, from social media. It's very interesting to watch this, but I think they're in of itself exactly what we're saying, that's where you get the most creativity, and it's the people that are not scared to disrupt the status quo. They're not scared to step out and be different, and they're not scared of people saying criticizing them or whatever, because if the moment you step out into the public eye,
Yeah.
you're opening the door for criticism, and you just got to get used to it
Yeah,
and
'cause I mean,
know.
you might be the critic's darling at first, but then they always wanna like, "Oh, well, the next thing you did is no good." So it's there's always the critic's like, "Well, you're the critic's darling right now," but the next thing you do, they're like, "Oh, that's not up to snuff." So, it's always, it's kinda what the way the wind blows. It's like but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do the work. You shouldn't try to put something out there, and that's where, yeah, I run into artists that you walk in their room and there's like all these paintings. Did you put any of these in a gallery? Did you even think to? So I'm not ready. And I'm like, well, you're not ready because that's not where your head's at. But like, you got a lot of work here, and you probably could do it, but you just or don't think you got that like what is like self sabotage, and you're basically not imposter syndrome. You're doing
Yep.
it, but you don't believe you should be doing
Yeah. Yeah. It's just self limiting beliefs. And I think that it's so important that people are okay with, I'm okay with putting myself out there, and because you never know. It could be, you could get criticized, but in every criticism, there's places to grow.
it. Yeah,
So I look at it like that. It doesn't make it easier to put things out, but when you do put them out and you get criticized over it, it's like, okay, let me take this back to the drawing board, see how I can make this better, and anytime that you're going to put yourself out there like that, you will fail a couple of times. That's just part of it. But at what expense? At the expense that you just are scared to put things out. You don't feed your creative genius. You don't feed the inspiration of others because you're just scared. So I always inspire people, like, step out and be you, embrace the failure, embrace the journey, because it's all beautiful, really.
yeah. Well, it's that story. Like everybody's story, it starts from like the beginning, and in the beginning, like every human being, you don't come out doing from like 100. It's like a 0 to 100. And if you think about, at least with musicians, like we have multiple versions of things. We are sitting around, in our archives. Like I got hundreds of things, right? And the way do I look at each one of those as a failure, or I look at it as a rung on the ladder to get to where I wanted to be? And
Yep.
if you start looking at things as like it's not a failure, it's a lesson learned. Like every day you're doing it, there's a different aspect of it, and sometimes we're not very good at picking the piece that's going to work. A lot of times we have to have other people go through our work and kind of pick the piece that they think is going to work. And that's when you work with labels and stuff. And artists are known for not picking like the piece that everybody really loves. It's like they picked the wrong one to present. And so today it's like it's very important. I see a lot of people like kind of get this thrown at the wall on different places because there's so many places to put your work. You can put your work in so many different platforms, and you can go beyond your neighborhood. You're going like global. And when you put your work out there, you'd be surprised. My daughter does like online gallery for disabled artists,
Oh,
and it allows disabled artists to get their work into these like online galleries that, that they wouldn't have been able to get to a physical gallery, but they got their work there. And it just opens up so many doors that people didn't even think of opening.
Yeah, I've never even considered that, and I photograph art, but that's just not an area that I've ever really pushed towards. I just, you know, it's funny because I think that it's such a beautiful thing being able to. There's so many different avenues that you can go into with art, and it pushes you. And it's like if you're not doing the thing, you can't get the criticism, you're not going to grow. You got to have criticism to grow. You got to have somebody to correct you in the areas that you're not necessarily your best. And that's how you grow. So I always tell people embrace it all, embrace
Well,
every
it's like
part of
when
it.
you have your it's like when you have your story, like you have to create like an elevator pitch that becomes like your signature story. And the only way you can get that out there is if you practice it and you pitch it. Right. So if you keep that story to yourself, how is anybody ever going to know? And like over time, after the first time you present it, maybe you didn't get it right. Then the next time you get better, you see people's eyes, you see the non you get to see that, oh, it's working, right? So then you adjust it. But if you never speak those words of your pitch, or you never tell your signature story, or you don't go on a platform like a podcast, or go out and do public speaking, or show up at a poetry slam, or show up at a show where you can show your work for amateur night, they let you put it out there, then you won't be able to refine that story, right? And the more you get it out there, the better you practice. Like it's like musicians, we practice, right? How do we get good? Because we practice. So
Mhm.
like if you're gonna get out there, you gotta practice that too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when I first started talking, I had a really hard time just talking. I had a hard time getting my ideas out there. And I had a business mentor that I used to follow, and he said, you need to publish every day. Just publish something every day.
Mm,
And I'm like, okay, let me try this. And then you try for a little while and you fall off. And then you're like, oh, I feel like such an idiot. I sound like an idiot talking on camera. But the more that you do it, the better you get. And I do think that, sometimes that it goes back to embracing the journey. You have to embrace the uncomfortable.
yeah,
That's just
and it
human
becomes
nature.
comfortable. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like if you think it's just like sports. You're like, if it's easy to understand why a basketball player sits there practicing that 3-point shot, so it becomes muscle memory, it's automatic, and he just hits it every time. Well, things are that simple. Like if to play really well as a musician, you're doing like the same thing, right? You get to the point where you could be distracted and you're going to play that perfect because it's like muscle memory, because it's like that 3-point shot. And it's
yeah,
like podcasting. Like after, when I first did it, I was uncomfortable as heck. I didn't know what I was doing. And then probably after episode 100, I started getting more comfortable. And
yeah,
now it's kind of like it's just automatic. I don't have to worry about it. It just and I was so uncomfortable as a kid. Like I was like crying at my first junior high assembly. I couldn't even. They wanted me to do some Flag Day speech, and I got so shaky they had to pull me off the stage. I was freaking out. Like I was like could not do this at all. And it really because I just started thinking about it. It's like musicians. It's like the rehearsal. If you do it, it becomes natural. It becomes less problem. You don't overthink it, and it just happens.
hmm But the first time that you have an athlete that steps on that basketball court, he can't make that shot. He doesn't know what he's doing. You have to be able to step out for the first time and do that thing. And that's uncomfortable when you're not good at something. But the cost of not doing it is like living the rest of your life in fear. So, you know, I love the journey. The I love the transformation, and I think
Mhm.
that's why I have Transformation Through Trauma Project, because I just love seeing transformation in people that was embraced that uncomfortable. They did the thing, and now they have a story to tell because of it, and that's art in and of itself. I got into, when I was in college, I got into bodybuilding because I was 98 pounds when I graduated high school.
Oh wow.
And like lanky and just not just no physique at all.
No
And
muscles.
nothing. I couldn't even lift the bar. I mean, I took a weightlifting class in my senior year in high school and I could not even lift the bar, and I was like the weakest girl in the entire class. And I was so embarrassed, but I'm like, I am going to change this. I was intrigued by the physique. I felt like that is art in and of itself, is creating, you know,
Hmm.
the human body is an amazing thing,
Yeah.
especially the female human body, because you can go from being, one way and then having a baby and bringing life into the world and then transforming your body yet again. It's just an amazing thing. But I feel like bodybuilding is an art form in and of itself. And I went on to compete on a national level, and then that's kind of the itch I was trying to fill with the photography, which has led me down this long journey. But it just goes back to embracing that journey and knowing that you're not going to be perfect at something when you first start, but that's the beauty of it. The beauty of getting better and seeing transformation is the willingness to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing like in music. Sometimes you'll get a producer and they'll say, you're the bass player. I want you to jump on the piano and just try something. And the bass player is there thinking like, well, I know the bass. I don't really know the piano. But there's a thing where sometimes you switch instruments because then it makes you think about it in a different way. So a bass player is going to think about playing that piano differently than a perfect piano player that somebody really knows it. So they might approach it in a different way. And the producers like thought is, I want to hear if he has some different idea
Mm,
of how to do this. So he approach it in a non-standard way, which will
hmm
drive all the other people that's like, whoa, well, maybe I should try something different. And just trying something that you're not comfortable with. It's a willingness to go to something that you're not perfect at
well, and
and give it a try, then it kind of opens things up.
that's inspiration. By you stepping out of your comfort zone and doing something you're uncomfortable with, then doing something amazing, then other people, are inspired by you. So it's funny to me how interconnected the human experience is. We are so interconnected with each other. And I think that is just another reason why, an encouragement to be super creative in a world that so needs it.
Yeah, because everybody can like use this. I believe the cathartic nature of art therapy. I totally believe in it. It's part of my daily life to express myself. I do some stuff with video work, I do some artwork, and I do my music. And in art, I'm not the best. I'm better at my music, but it doesn't mean I don't try
Hmm
because it's something I want to express visually or something with art. That's more like graphic art that I'll incorporate stuff into my overall experience of what I'm trying to push out because it's like a sound painting. It's a project that has a visual, audio, physical aspects to it. So I think when you push yourself into those places, that it gets your mind off the troubles. Like you can get rid of the noise.
Yeah.
Like if you get into like focusing on painting, even though you're not a painter, it'll kind of, if you have all these troubles, it will start to make those troubles maybe transform onto the page,
hmm
and then it flows into that new form, and then you got it off of your back. you know
Yeah. Yeah, and you brought up a good point. I mean, anytime that we can appeal to multiple senses. So, visually is amazing, but then if we can appeal to multiple senses, so now we're appealing to visual and audio, and we're appealing to touch, the sense of touch. Once you kind of incorporate all of these things, it just builds on the other things.
Yeah, because to be grounded, like if you go out in nature and you're barefoot and you're touching the soil, then you kind of in touch with Gaia, and you get this like I walk in the woods and it's like this great poem that says like nature is a cathedral. And a lot of times before I do anything, I just like to want to find that quiet that I find. I live in New Hampshire, so I go out in the pines, and it gives me a lot of inspiration. And I'm not don't have my headphone, don't have my cell phone on. I'm just listening to the river, listening to the birds, listening to the wind going through the pines. That in itself just gives me a lot of ideas, and I don't even know. I just kind of take it in, and it just makes me feel better
Hmm.
by getting out of the modern world with all the pings and tweets and everything hitting me. I was like, well, I just need a place to kind of have some quiet. But it's
Yeah.
not quiet. There's actually a different kind of quiet.
Well, the brain, I think, is a funny thing, and the more that I talk to people that specifically the effects that trauma has on the brain, but it goes to the other spectrum of that as well. The effect of having no pressure on the brain or just being able to relax. And there is something, again, we're interconnected with nature. So there's something peaceful about being in nature. But when we can almost get in that meditative state and walking and being in nature and being in fresh air, you are somewhat in a meditative state. You're not thinking of work. You're not putting pressure on yourself. And this is when stuff can really come up that's like, oh, I need to embrace that. I love to carry a little notebook with me. Well, a lot of times it's in my phone, my notes
Mhm.
on my phone.
Yeah, yeah.
But, just write down those things because there's so much inspiration can come in those moments of like when you're not expecting it.
Yeah, like voice memos. Like sometimes I'll do a voice memo of something I'm feeling, or I'll actually take an audio field recording of the Merrimack River or the wind going through the trees or the sounds of all the animals in the forest and incorporate it into my work. Kind of
Yeah.
like some of my like one of my bands I loved was a band called Yes. And in the 60s, at the beginning of one of their albums, they actually did a field recording in the woods. And it's on this album called Close to the Edge. In the beginning of the album actually starts off with a field recording of this woods that they did a field recording with microphones and picked up the sound of the woods. And
Wow.
our whole album starts with that before they actually get into the song. You hear this sound of the woods, and it's kind of a progressive hippie type of thing to do, but like, yeah, it sounds cool.
No, it's really cool, and we don't know what that actually does to our brains, to start out listening to something. I think sometimes it can open up certain areas and certain areas of creativity. It kind of gets out there a little bit, and the people might classify it as foo-foo, but um, I believe in all of that. I do believe in the power of nature and the power of I do believe that we are equipped as human beings with everything inside of us, and it's literally just connecting with God and finding those answers to everything that we need.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just need to embrace that kind of muse or the universe. Like I've always felt like you do that everybody can be creative, and every day that you do something, you're kind of riffing from your experience, and people don't, they don't realize they are, but like your approach to life is creative in itself. How you
Yeah.
handle the day, how you handle things that come to you. Everybody does it in a different way, and that's your
Hmm.
creative energy. And once you realize that you that's yours, and you can interpret it, and you can have your own stamp on the world, and people actually hear your voice. That's your power.
Yeah.
and and how you can, even if you can't sing, you could say something and it's your truth. It's what you feel, and how you express it. If you don't tell anybody, nobody knows.
Mm,
And
that's
so if
so
you
true.
actually put it out there, then you'll find there's other people that believe the same thing you feel or feel the same way you feel. And then you'll start getting more like reinforcement, like the law of cause and effect or law of attraction.
Yeah.
Things will come to you.
Well, I do believe that we are assigned certain people to cross paths with in this life. And if we are not opening our mouths and talking, if we're not speaking, sometimes they can't find us. If you don't if someone is not talking I would look at you and I would never know you're a cancer survivor. You would look at me and know, and I mean, we didn't get into a lot of my personal story, but you would not know that I've been divorced. You would not know, all these different things that I've been through in my life. You wouldn't know these things until I speak. And so I think that by talking and by sharing, there are people that are going to align perfectly with you, and those are your people. You're not going to be a fit for everybody, but you're going to be a fit for those that need you, and those your destiny kind of assigns you to. So I think speaking your story is great truth and great power. So I encourage all people to do that.
Well, I do want to remind people to check out your link, transformation through traumaproject.com. We do encourage the listeners and viewers of the podcast to click on the URLs of the guests we have on. We actually hit our hour mark. It's always faster than we ever think it's going to come, but I think we had a really great discussion talking about transformation and trauma and how it inspires art and how art is actually within everybody. And I hope everybody can check out and get further information from you about your project and actually, you know, connect with you as a result of this podcast. And I want to thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.